and welcome. My name is Jessica Shea. I work at Old Mission Santa Barbara, and I would like to welcome all of you to the final talk in our third annual virtual speaker series. This year's series is Climate Change, Caring for Our Common Home. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that here in Santa Barbara, we are on the ancestral homelands of the Chumash people who have lived here for thousands of years. A reminder that all attendees are on mute and video screens are turned off. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. If you have any questions for our panelists, please enter them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. This program is free and the recording will be available on the mission's YouTube channel. If you would like to support this program and educational programs like it, you can make a contribution. A link will be going out to you afterward. Of course, this is completely optional, and we appreciate you being here this evening as we discuss aspects of one of the most pressing issues of our time, climate change. As a Franciscan organization, Old Mission Santa Barbara has hosted this speaker series as part of our effort to respond to Pope Francis's second encyclical, a call to action for all people to better and more thoughtfully care for our common home, Earth. Our moderator this evening is Cassandra Carmichael, Executive Director of the National Religious Partnership for the Environment, an alliance of independent faith groups that are responding to environmental challenges through faith-based actions. I will turn the program over to Cassandra, who will introduce our panelists and lead our discussion this evening. Cassandra?
Thank you, Jessica, and good evening, everyone. We are delighted to be here with three excellent panelists, and I'm going to surprise them with a popcorn of questions, and I hope we have a very insightful conversation. So before we get started with the question part, I want to make sure that everyone is introduced. I have Ivor John. He is actively involved with Eco Faith of Santa Barbara, and he's also on the board and the current president of the Interfaith Initiative of Santa Barbara County. So we're very much looking forward to Ivor's contributions to this conversation. We also have Reverend Julia Hamilton. She's the lead minister of the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara, and she previously served as the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of New Jersey. And then we also have Reverend Scott Clausen, and he is an Episcopal priest, currently serving as the chaplain to the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's the vicar of St. Michael's University Church. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask the first question to Reverend Hamilton. Reverend Hamilton, can you talk about how your own faith has informed your work on climate change? And you can unmute to answer the question.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. It's great to be in conversation with you all and with everybody who's joining us. So how has my own faith informed climate change? So one of the core pieces of my tradition of Unitarian Universalism, and I think it's shared amongst many traditions, is a understanding of interdependence, that we don't live isolated lives, but we are inextricably connected, not just with other people, but with the world around us, that we are part and parcel of the universe, of the earth, of an interconnected web of social relationships, of ecological relationships. It's very much grounded in this, I love the word ecology, the idea of an ecosystem rather than sort of isolated individualism. And we live in such a ruggedly individualistic society. Being part of a congregation, being part of a religious community is a bit countercultural these days, because it really does create an alternative space from this sort of, we're all in it on our own, we're, sort of competitive, individualistic environment. It creates a space that asks us to really reflect on our interdependence, to really reflect on the ways that we are connected and the way our actions affect not just the people we know, but kind of ripple out and in ways that a lot of times we never even see. And so there's also part of being interconnected and interdependent is a belief that our actions matter in ways large and small, that we aren't, that there's meaning and purpose to be found in in those relationships. And so how we care for those relationships and how we tend that interdependent web is important. And that's a big core piece of how I view sort of the worldview that my faith has, that's constructed through my faith, I think.
And I do want to unpack that a little bit in a minute. But I want to turn to Reverend Clausen and ask, because Reverend Hamilton started talking about how we're interrelated and connected and part and parcel with each other, but faith communities were sort of countercultural, is what she said. Why should faith communities and people of faith in particular work to address climate change? I mean, don't we have other things that we should be tending to? Why should we care about this? Why should we even work on it?
Well, to tie in with Reverend Hamilton's notions there, because we are inextricably linked to everything that physically exists, this is essential to our own being, climate change or none. Now, in the face of climate change, our own health and the health of those around us, our own relationship to justice and the relationship to justice of those around us, are the just general well-being of all of us is interlinked. So we are not at a point where we could play that game any longer of imagining that we are isolated. We're invited into this, into living into a deeper relationship, which is a great thing. It's a great opportunity. I see it as a way in which humanity can develop and engage into something that has always been there, but that we've had the privilege of ignoring. Sadly, that privilege is not really like a benefit to anyone. It actually keeps us from living into who we are and what we are. But in terms of specifically with regard to faith communities, to live into our core tenets, particularly from a Christian perspective, living into relationship with God and neighbor, we can no longer do so without facing climate change. It's impossible to ignore at this point, and we can continue more on that conversation.
So you mentioned isolation, which I think is a really interesting word. So I want to go over to Ivor John. I recognize we have two reverends, and I've always been taught that you refer to a reverend as a reverend, and then I'm Cassandra. So
I'm happy just to be Scott, by the way. From here.
I'm also fine with Juliet.
Okay,
No offense taken. You can just refer to me by my first name. That's totally fine.
Same here.
Ivor, you've been doing a lot of work in the interfaith context. And I know that we often, the faith communities often segment themselves into these like pillars and columns of isolation, to use your word, Scott. What does the interfaith community, what do interfaith initiatives have to offer to the climate movement in particular?
Well, first of all, thanks to the Old Mission and to Jessica for inviting me to join your panel. I think this is a very exciting program that we're involved with. One of the things that wasn't said in the introduction, Cassandra, is that I'm actually a PhD atmospheric scientist and a climate researcher. So over the years, I've seen how hard it is for scientists alone to make an impact on this, one of the most significant crises our human race has ever faced, and the planet with us. So I've forged my values and sense of faith in the various congregations that I've been a part of through my life, the inspired leadership that I've got. So it's brought me to a place where I really see the place for faith communities to be involved in this conversation. And there is a very powerful thing that happens, I think, every once a week when a congregation meets. The faith leader, the clergy, the minister, the rabbi, the imam speaks to the congregation, and that's a very inspiring and uplifting moment in the week. So congregations and faith communities have a real opportunity to lead the way here. And we were very fortunate that 12 years ago, our local congresswoman, Lois Capps, initiated eco-faith through inviting faith leaders back to Washington for Faith in Congress Day, I think it was. And then the community said, we've got to do something, and we stepped up. So we'll talk more about how that relates, I think, but that's my perspective. I feel very called to participate in this side of the move towards making change happen.
The three of you, in some form or fashion, using different words and language, have referenced relationships and people and connections, bodies of people that come together, which makes me think of the word justice for some reason. So justice is often referenced in the Bible. Julia, how do you think justice as it's referenced in scripture, and it's across, like justice is part of many different faith traditions, how does this apply to climate action?
Well, I think, getting back to that theory of interdependence, justice is an outgrowth of that belief that it matters. Other people's suffering matters, right? That you can't, it's not just, suffering doesn't just begin and end with your own experience, but that the suffering of other people, other beings, of the planet, of the ecosystem matters, in our interconnection. And so that when someone else is undergoing hardship, that has an impact on me, that we're connected, those threads are woven together. So when we're talking about climate disasters, for example, the suffering that's brought about because of the shift in the climate, we can just take the most recent storm in Florida, of course, and you can pick any number of events that are happening all around the globe constantly, that because of the shift in our climate, the unpredictability of the weather and disaster events, the increased intensity, there is this increase in suffering. And the people who are already living on the margins, already scrapping by to try to fix their roof under the best of circumstances, under a normal rainstorm, the people who are trying to heat their home in a normal winter, those folks who are living so close to the bone already are going to have disproportionate impact of these climate, be feeling the suffering of these climate disasters disproportionately. People who are already facing environmental racism, are already living in communities that are bearing the brunt of our consumptive habits or our polluting habits. Then you add climate disaster on top of that. And so we have to recognize that if we're going to do something about this, it takes more than just the local community that's affected, because it's a global crisis. So, the community in Florida that got flooded and washed away by the hurricane can't address the crisis by themselves. They need people need to act in solidarity with one another, recognizing that the suffering that's inflicted because of the climate crisis is global, and it's interconnected. And we can't, as Scott said, we can no longer live in ignorance about the role that we all have to play in this interdependent global system of the climate and the problems that were going to be increasingly devastating.
Ivor, I'm really curious about, as you referenced, your both work as a scientist, but you've also been walking in this interfaith world related to climate. But wearing your scientist hat, if we even can wear multiple hats, right? Like, I think that's sort of an anomaly. Like, we really just wear one hat; they just blend together. What does it mean from a scientific perspective when you hear the word justice?
Well, I think that's a very personal question to any scientist. And I think of 2 or 3 other colleagues who've engaged very deeply on this. Catherine Hayhoe, Professor Catherine Hayhoe, who speaks so eloquently and articulately about, you know, the difference of the science and the facts and her faith. She's a very devout evangelical, and I'm totally inspired by her work and how she asks us all to be in conversations around climate so that we're all building community to go with it. Another scientist who passed away a year or 2 ago was Sir John Houghton. Sir John, again, a Baptist Welshman, very evangelical till the day he died. He led the first IPCC COP meetings where, you know, the recognition of the climate crisis was evident. He was, you know, the epitome of a scientist that lived with and balanced his faith perspectives. So for me, it's the same. You know, I have my own world out there that I work in, exposed to the realities of, you know, how does the world work? That's a very valuable quality to bring and say, you know, you can't just ask people to stop doing things or to do certain things without realizing the implications. We're seeing it in Europe right now. So, you know, you turn off a gas pipeline and people are going to go cold this winter. It's a hard one. Justice is the big issue. And one last thing I'll say is I read a piece by Bill McKibben in the New Yorker recently about how the Democratic Republic of the Congo wants to develop its fossil fuels. And there's this pushback saying, hey, you can't do that. This is going to, you know, destroy the world. And the Minister for Climate said, you know, our crisis in the Congo is poverty. You know, we share the climate crisis, but this is our single most important thing to do. Which brings me right to Laudato Si, when, you know, the Pope's common, you know, care for our common home and care for the poor, as well as, you know, the planet itself. So there's so much to this topic, Cassandra, and I think it's a good one that you've brought up very quickly in the conversation here.
Well, it's interesting, you know, Julia, you talked about consumptive habits. Ivor, you mentioned about sort of the complications of asking people to go without. And I worked for an organization a while ago, and we often hear complaints that taking environmental action would put us back into the quote dark ages. We'd be knitting sweaters in the cold corners of our houses, unlit. And that we would have to be in the dark, and that there would be great suffering, and we'd have to make significant sacrifices to achieve a carbon-free world or an environmentally friendly world. Scott, you took a carbon Sabbath. Do you agree with that sentiment that we have to make these great sacrifices that are going to so negatively impact our lives that we're going to be miserable?
Not at all. I think that we're stepping into an opportunity to live more deeply into relationship. I also think that the advances in technology that are there for us in response to climate change are fantastic. I think so. There's the technological aspect of that. But let me rewind and let's talk about the carbon Sabbath real quick. So after finishing seminary at Yale Divinity School, while I was also studying religion and ecology at Yale School of Forestry, they called it then, but now it's School of Environmental Studies. I spent 1 year without flying or driving, and during that time, I bicycled around the country, engaging Christian communities in dialogue about climate change. I call this a carbon Sabbath. And so I cycled all around the country for a year, and that process, it was an incredible process of stepping into recognizing what it was that I really needed, like how much food did I need? How much money do I need? All of those things. I was living entirely off of the donations of people who would give to help fund that project. So I was living hand to mouth, which was fantastic. And I would arrive into a town where I didn't know anyone, and some stranger that had heard about me probably a couple of weeks before from some kind of faith community, some kind of Christian community, would be there. And a lot of times there were someone that did not that might have been a climate denier, or there was a wide variety of hosts. But in any case, I would arrive sweaty and tired and vulnerable and in need of help. And that practice showed me how little I need, which was fantastic, right? That all that bit is great to live into the reality that we have enough, that we have everything that we need, that we could feed the entire world if we would just live into the abundance that we have. Got that piece, right? And I do think that's a fantastic piece, but I don't think the kind of like self-flagellation of an endeavor like that is the takeaway. I think that that the opportunities we have are just going to enrich our lives. I mean, for me, I tried to have a primarily plant-based diet following that experience, and that's only made my life enriched through creativity in cooking, through my own health, my own physical well-being of eating in a more healthy fashion, and diminishing my impact on the environment. There are those aspects, but clearly the idea that we are closing our ears and pretending that climate change is not happening is an antiquated and anachronistic thought, that and any solutions that don't address the reality are only going to exacerbate the problem.
So Julia, I'm going to turn to you and build off of this. From your perspective, how can we sort of redefine the concept of abundance and blessing in the age of climate change? Or, Scott, I really like what you were saying. It's more about opportunity, less about sacrifice, right?
Right.
Which is actually, in some ways, that's the beauty of a Sabbath, right? Like you divorce yourself, you move away from the things that are distractions from the sacred, and you then can embrace the rest and the relationship. So, Julia, talk to me about abundance and blessing as in the age of climate change. What does this mean?
So the first thought that came, and as I was listening to you describe your experience, Scott, was the relationship between abundance and creativity, and some faith in human creativity. We are just given the opportunity. We invent stuff just because it's fun. I mean, look at TikTok, right? Like, we just do things. Human beings just love to fiddle around. We're problem solvers. Look at the amount of people who spend so much time doing Wordle. I mean, there's nothing productive about that, but people love to get in and use our capacities and our facilities in all kinds of creative, fun, sometimes frivolous ways. And so to say like the only choice is between, the overconsumptive habits that we've fallen into and knitting sweaters in the dark is just to overlook this beautiful creativity that we have within us, right? And so instead of spending all of this time fretting about this sort of fear-based, sacrificial, penitent, to be in, and a lot of times this is totally a straw argument, right? This is to hold up against sort of the standard of living argument that people who want to continue reaping enormous profits off of our current system will hold up. They'll say the opposite of this is hair shirt, right? Either you get to go to the grocery store and have anything you want, anytime you want it, order from Amazon in 24 hours, or we're wearing hair shirts and eating, potatoes for 9 months out of the year, as if those are the only two options. That's such a limited vision. And there's such an opportunity for really fun, creative, meaningful engagement that's rooted in this idea of the abundance of the world, the abundance of human ingenuity, the abundant possibilities that exist in community and relationship. And I think this actually solves, I think, two crises that we're at. There's the environmental crises, and then there's this crisis that we're going on with in the human spirit right now. A sense of disconnection, a sense of meaninglessness, a sense of cynicism about, is it all worth it? Are all systems corrupt? That it results in you can see sort of the drug use. You can when you talk about like it's life-threatening issues like suicide, when people are sort of feeling fatalistic and hopeless. I think that's also because they are not connected to the abundance of life and the meaning of a creative existence in relationship to that abundance. So when we address the climate crisis through creativity, we're actually feeding the human spirit, not just solving global warming.
Ivor, from your perspective, I'd like to ask you basically the same question. When you think about, because I think you really have all three of you have a very unique purview and very different lived experiences. When you think about abundance and blessing in the face of this crisis, this climate crisis, when I say those words, what comes to mind?
Yeah, first of all, my perspective of abundance and blessing is very much how I feel and how I, feel about myself and how complete I feel within. And it's got very little to do with material things or possessions and how much stuff I have. It's how I am inside. And I feel I'm living a very blessed life and an abundant life because I live very, very in a privileged way, but a very spiritual life connected with my community, my friends, and with nature. I feel like not everyone in the world is blessed that way. Even before climate change, there's so much injustice and inequity in the abundance and the blessing because so many people in other countries and other places don't have the life that I enjoy. So you add climate on top of that, and I think this is a really very, very challenging time for us. And it's one where, when I witness the loss and suffering of those who are going through these crises, then I find that the best that I can do is to go deeply into my faith and really look and call upon, those deep places and say, what's the best response to this and how can we make it better? Again, all resonates so powerfully for me with the Pope's message of Laudato Si.
So Ivor, I'm putting you on the spot. What do you think our biggest challenge is regarding climate change?
Oh, that's a good one. The biggest challenge is coming together. I think we are really struggling right now with a partisan, polarized world. We are seeing oppositional responses to so many things. And it comes back to, Professor Catherine Hayhoe, have conversations and start to, get together with people in your communities, in your congregations who you have shared values. We all care when the wildfire comes down and causes great harm in our community. We're all concerned about that. Having a conversation around that and growing out of it, the quicker we can bring people together to realize that things need to be done quickly, that's the biggest problem that I see. And I think that the opposite is happening in so many ways, where you have the left wing and the right wing in sort of battle, as it were, and the language is from the battlefield. We're in a fight, and I feel like we need to come together. That's the biggest challenge, and once we're able to do that, then things happen. But it's very difficult while we're so polarized.
Scott, what's the biggest challenge related to climate change?
Well, along with what I was saying, that we need to come together, and I think one of the things that is missing from the ability to come together, and something that faith traditions can offer, is the contemplative practices that harness intention. I don't think humanity has obviously not set the intention that we are going to do something about climate change. Now, do I think it's practical that that we convince a majority of the population of the earth that we need to set that intention? I don't think so. But I do think that that a small group of people that with a deeply set intention can share that in a way that inspires through creativity, as Julia was speaking about. And we have that obligation to bring that creativity, but we also we're missing the bit of setting the intention, setting us apart, maybe part of our days, part of our weeks, gathering together as a group of people to set the intention, saying we are going to face this. And we're not facing it, I think, in the last, say, 10 years, we've been addressing climate change as if it were something that a tidal wave that is coming. And I think that we are missing the reality that we are in it already. So we have to live into the present moment and set the intention to address that as a collective.
Julia, what do you think is the biggest challenge?
Oh, it depends on the hour that you ask me, and how much sleep I got the night before. But, I think international cooperation is going to be a huge piece of this. And I am not well versed in the international politics of global corporations, so I can't speak to that. But I do know that one of the opportunities within faith movements is that there are faith communities that are interconnected around the globe. And I think there's ways for us to build networks and relationships that are not just political in nature, but that can also be faith-based in nature, that also can be connective community to community, in ways that then allow us to mobilize locally, allow us to put pressure on our governments, wherever those governments may be, wherever those institutions and corporations may be located. But there's ways that we can connect with each other in this global crisis, perhaps through faith networks and interfaith relationships, because I do think this is something that requires all of us, and it's both awareness so that we know what's going on in other places. So we can share stories, we can talk about strategies, we can build understanding through these networks, but then also we can find solidarity, and we can identify where the most effective actions might be, and throw our weight behind them collectively. And I think I come from a fairly small faith tradition, globally speaking. We're very much grounded in the United States. We have a few relationships in other parts of the globe, but there are other faith communities that have a much wider global reach who are represented here. And the interfaith partnerships, the potential for interfaith partnerships on this issue are tremendous. And this is hard because we are divided along a lot of other fault lines in social issues. But I hope that on the climate crisis, there's ways that we can find to come together to address this issue that affects all of us around the globe.
So the three of you have woven into your answers a little bit of faith, a lot of hope, a little bit more faith, a lot of connections and coming together. So faith, hope, love. Which one is the most important in order for us to address climate change, and why would you choose that one? So I'm going to start with Ivor. Faith, hope, or love. You can only pick one.
Oh, Cassandra, this is Well, this is a very difficult question. I think that I believe all three of those are essential to coming together to solve this climate problem. So I would say that all three are very much priorities, but I always do love the Corinthians, faith, hope, and love all abide. Of these, the greatest is love. And I think, Julia, in the Unitarian Society, love is absolutely fundamental to everything. So if there's got to be a winner, I suppose it's love, but for me, it's all three.
Okay, Julia, faith, hope, or love. This is like a
Right, like
game
you're asking
show.
us to choose our favorite children. So I do agree. I think I'm going to put in for hope, because I think love is so fundamental that it exists. Whether I think love just exists. I think it is a ground of being. I think it is something. It is bedrock. I am enamored these days of the phrase "hope is a discipline." It's an organizer, Miriam Kaba, I think is her name, made this beautiful poster that I saw, and hope is a discipline. And so I'm leaning into that as if we had to pick one to focus on, not ranking. I want to, bust up a hierarchical position and into say, okay, where are we going to focus rather than who do we like best? But I say right now, I think love abides. I think I would focus on hope. Because it is a discipline. It is easy to get hopeless. It is easy to despair if we don't cultivate the practice of hope, which to me is very much also tied with humility, of not knowing, knowing what we don't know. And when you're hopeless, it's like you assume you know the outcome. So for me, hope as a discipline means reminding myself I can never know. That is beyond me to know. I hope instead of knowing. And if you try to know, you're going to find yourself easily crushed. But I can always choose to hope. And so that's the discipline for me.
Great. Okay, Scott, faith, hope, or love?
Yeah, I'm gonna side with love. Although it's like, like you said, it's they're all one and the same. I think we can come on. I love that idea that hope is a discipline. We're just coming off of kind of like the wedding season around here, and I do a lot of weddings. And one of the themes that sometimes comes up in my wedding homilies is the notion that love is a choice. It's a decision. It's not a one-time decision. We, in our relationships, we don't like say one time I'm going to be with this person and then that is just how it goes for the rest of your life. Day after day, you have to make that decision. Similarly, in our relationship with the divine and our relationship with one another, we have to make that decision to step into that love. I do think that love is the ground of our being. And again, like Julie was talking about early on, I think that this moment in history is informing us about something about who we are and why we are here. And I believe that we are here to participate in eternal love at work. And in this moment in history, we have a unique opportunity to live into an expansive knowledge of that. So I say we make the decision, the choice to love.
Okay. So my next question is for you, Ivor. What would you tell a person of faith? I get this a lot, actually. People ask, what should I do? What do you tell a person of faith who wants to take action on climate? What do you tell them? What should they do?
Yeah, this is such a difficult question to answer, and it comes up all the time. People are always asking me, what should I do? And I really try to avoid the prescriptive lists, all the things we need to do. Not that they're unimportant, they're absolutely important. But I think as members of faith communities, and from my discipline, around faith, I feel that there's more opportunity for faith communities to make a difference if we can talk with each other. I've mentioned this and I keep coming back to it, because I think if we can grow the the partners in this process with us through conversations, through building community and relationships. That is going to be an essential tenet to getting to where we need to be. Also, last week, Brother Keith, when he was asked this same question, he said, go out into nature and have a relationship with nature and the earth and creation. And I believe that if you are in relationship with someone and anything in this beautiful place we have, our planet home, then you will love it and you will try your very best to not allow harm in any way to come to it. So those are a little bit more abstract, and I think very relevant to people of faith, which go beyond, the practical things that every person should be trying to do in their daily lives.
Scott, following up a little bit on that, I'm not going to ask you the same question. What unique role do you think pastors and ministers, rabbis, clergy play or should play in addressing climate change?
Well, I think that in any kind of faith leadership role, it's crucial to have to be that non-anxious presence. So I think one curious thing about climate change is that we confront essentially the potential end of humanity and the rest of the planet as we know it, which is terrifying, and it's anxiety riddling. And I think to tie into that your previous question, and then I'll bring it back into leadership. I have a fairly traditional answer to this, which is that I believe that we should pray. I think that we should turn to our contemplative practices, which still our minds, calm our minds, and give us clarity, plug us into the source of this creativity that we've spoken about several times. And without that, I think we are prone to anxiety that will just eat itself. So I think we need to find ways to be a non-anxious presence as leaders. And for me, that goes back to a foundation of a prayer practice and a meditation practice. For me personally, that also ties back to, I spent some time at Plum Village with Thich Nhat Hanh in France years ago. And for me, the simple mindfulness practice, the simple zazen type meditation of sitting and calming my mind is essential to my own leadership, both in just normal daily church life, but also in my ability to think creatively and in leadership fashion as we face things like climate change.
So Julie, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not going to ask you the same question. Years ago, when I worked for the National Council of Churches, we did a survey of all the different, for lack of a better word, environmental advocates within the church. And we asked them, what do they think is the most important thing that's needed to take action within a congregation to, plant a tree or start a recycling program or do clean water. And what we found when we asked them the question, but then also asked them data about their particular congregation, we found that if they had a really strong, sorry, Scott, sorry, Julia, a really strong religious leader that was pushing for environmental change, maybe it made a difference, maybe it didn't. But if there was a committee, 100% of the time, that congregation took action. And it reminds me of the phrase in the Bible, when two or more are gathered, there I am, and I'm paraphrasing. So what is the unique role that the body, the congregation plays as we work to address climate change? We've talked about, clergy and religious leaders, but what is the unique role that a congregation can and should be playing as we work?
I'm so glad that you asked that in that way, and that you let professional religious leadership off the hook for being responsible for everything. Right? Because that's like the thing. And I'm not surprised at that survey at all, because that happens, right? People project onto public figures and onto leaders, and then it's a way of almost saying, well, I don't have to do it because I've got this person doing it for me, right? There's like this avatar effect. And what you talked about having like peer-to-peer relationships, having a strong group within a congregation where people are seeing themselves in the work, not projecting it onto a religious leader on whom they, well, that's not my job. That's, I think those are really powerful relationships. And so religious communities, I think, should not neglect the power of peer-to-peer lay-led initiatives and work, because that is truly where capacity is built, and truly where long-term systemic lasting change can happen. Because also religious leadership changes, congregations last hundreds of years sometimes, and how many religious leaders will come and go, but a congregation that has a strong ethic of responsibility and ecological sensibility, like that will last generations. And that only is built up through lay leadership and having a strong congregation-based or community-based sense of ownership of the work. I think what congregations can do is both provide a place for people to figure out how to do the work, to connect to movements and whatever, but I think it can also provide a container, a place for people to bring all of the wrestling and the feelings and the despair, and not have to be perfect, right? Like, if we hold up the model of environment, and it can get really intense in a lot of our movement building spaces, this sort of perfection and purity ethic, like that somehow doing it means you have to do it perfectly. Never shall plastic pass my threshold, or I have given up any right to participate, right? And I think we and I hope in congregational-based systems can model a little bit more humility and a little bit more acceptance of our imperfections and our stumbling and our wrestling and our grief. Like, we haven't really talked about how much grief there is and how that can become paralyzing. And so getting people unstuck through spiritual practices, through a sense of sharing the load. Congregations are places where people can come when they're stuck and hopefully get unstuck. And people do that for each other through friendships and congregational invested activities, not just through the sermon on Sundays, or whenever it is you give your sermon, Fridays.
Right. Or Saturdays. Ivor, this is my last question. I'm gonna ask all three of you the same question, and this is how we're going to close our time out together. Not in a sense of grief and despair, but going a little bit back to our faith, hope, and love question. But Ivor, what gives you hope?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist, and I have no doubt that the human race will be able to solve the climate crisis. It won't be tomorrow, and it won't be easy, but I have confidence and faith that we'll pull this off. And I take great hope and inspiration from other things we've done when we've all agreed that the need is there to do it. We've cleaned up the smoke from the coal in London. 100 years ago, we decided we don't need coal in London anymore. We've cleaned up the air in Los Angeles. There's a long way to go, but 30 years ago, you couldn't breathe in Los Angeles. And it's hard work, but we've done it. And third, we have the technologies. That's not an issue at all. It's just a matter of coming up with a collective will to do it. And I think faith communities and interfaith groups have a real place to play in this, in how we can come together to really get on with the job here and make it happen. So I have lots of hope. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Scott, what gives you hope?
Well, when I saw this question, the thing that really responded to me was nature. Like Ivor said, for me, being out in nature, so today we had our weekly surfing and spirituality program. We take students out and we surf, and the tide was incoming, and there were a variety of leopard sharks in the shore break, where several people who had never been in the ocean before were surfing for the first time. And for everybody who doesn't know, leopard sharks are for the most part quite docile. In the local aquarium, my 3-year-old can pet them, but it's still a shark swimming underneath you, and that wildness, watching these sharks dart around underneath our feet in movement, reminds me of just how incredible nature is, and how I know us, that we are part of that whole process, that whole wilding, and we have the opportunity to live deeper into that. So I'm inspired by that, among other things.
I think I love that. Having seen Jaws way too many times. Julia, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I think, that variety, just the life is this incredibly regenerative, creative force, the animating force of life in the universe, in the world, in amongst us is so powerful and mysterious and beyond, back to that sense of of humility and being comfortable not knowing everything, and not controlling everything, right? Not feeling like we have to manage it all. When we try to, there's a difference between mitigating suffering caused by climate change and believing that, all of life is lost. But life is not lost. Human suffering, if we don't address this, is going to be extreme. And so I'm in it because the suffering we're causing one another through the climate crisis is extreme, and I don't want that. But the idea that life itself is somehow at threat, I think that's when no, life is so far extraordinarily creative beyond us. I want to be a part of it. I don't want the human race to be sidelined. I want to be a part of this incredible unfolding of life in the universe. And so that's hopeful for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivor and Julia and Scott. Wonderful insights and conversation. I appreciate you answering all my questions that I threw at you. And I'm going to turn it right back over to Jessica to close us out.
A big thank you to you, Cassandra. Thank you for leading our discussion and asking such insightful questions. I'd like to echo your thanks to our panelists, Ivor, Julia, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your insights and thoughts. Thank you to everyone who attended tonight, as well as the previous speaker series. I did drop a few links in the chat. If you enjoyed the speaker series and would like to support programs like this, you can donate if you wish. I also included the 2 links to our previous talks. Dr. Ramanathan spoke 2 weeks ago, and Brother Keith Warner, a Franciscan friar, spoke last week. So thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you'll all have a beautiful evening. Take care. Thank you.